A Bendy and the Ink Machine movie is finally happening, and honestly it's one of the hardest video game adaptations Hollywood could have picked, because on paper Bendy looks simple. It's just a creepy old cartoon horror game from the mascot YouTube era. But in practice, it really has a specific art style, a strange story structure, and a tone that consistently shifts between playful and deeply unsettling. And that's where the problem starts. If you try to translate Bendy directly into a movie, something is going to be missing, either the style, the story, or the entire identity of what made the game memorable in the first place. So the real question isn't just what will the Bendy movie look like, but whether it can actually work at all. If you're unfamiliar with Bendy and the Ink Machine, it's a first-person survival horror game following Henry Stein, a retired animator who returns to his abandoned workplace, Joy Drew Studios, after a 30-year absence. He discovers a nightmare world where an ink machine has brought twisted, inky versions of cartoon characters to life. Yes, I did steal that off of Google. Bendy is known for its very unique and very cool yellow, black, and white art style, which brings me to my first point. How is this art style going to be translated onto the screen? We know that the movie will be a hybrid of live action and CGI, but what will be CGI? The characters? Will we see something, for example, like Davy Jones's crew in Pirates of the Caribbean? You can see the actors in their great performances, but they act fully in motion capture so that they can be painted over with CGI. It would be a good choice to handle it that way, but there is another option. The characters will be in makeup and prosthetics, and the ink studio will be CGI, which seems unlikely. Having an entirely CGI location that your characters are in always looks terrible. For example, Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. Not to mention, the art style would be very hard for makeup artists to achieve, no matter how talented they are. So it's safe to say the first option will be more than likely what they do, or a mix of both. The second question I want to propose is what game they will adapt, if any, or will they just be taking things from every game and making one movie? The first option does seem the most obvious, with them just straight up adapting the first game. In the first game we meet our main character Henry, who I would have originally said that any actor could play him because we never see what he looks like, but that was before the second game, Bendy and the Dark Revival, came out and we see what he officially looks like. So now that that has happened, I do feel like they are obligated to find an actor that looks somewhat similar, although I imagine no one would really care if they didn't look alike, as being a good actor is more important than looking the exact same as the character. In Bendy and the Ink Machine, the first chapter of the game is essentially just Henry looking around the studio, and then he turns on the ink machine, unleashing the ink demon. In an attempt to escape, he falls through the floor, landing in the music department of the studio, where we meet our second antagonist, Sammy Lawrence. Sammy is my personal favorite Bendy character. I love how just weird and creepy he is, and I love his backstory. Sammy used to be the director of music for the Bendy cartoons until an ink pipe in his office burst all over him, causing him to go essentially insane. The best way to explain it is that the ink from the ink machine is alive, so it starts taking him over and corrupting his mind and teaching him to be completely made out of ink. When Henry meets Sammy in the game, he's fully out of his mind. He worships the ink demon and the ink machine and tries to sacrifice Henry to the demon, not even realizing that he once knew who Henry was.
Sheep, 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 it's time for sleep. Rest your head. It's time for bed. In the morning, you may wake. Or in the morning, you'll be dead.
Before I go any farther, this is what I would like to change about that and make the beginning of the movie. You have the exact same intro where Henry's old boss Joy Drew sends him a letter, tells him to visit the studio, but when we go to the studio, I would make Henry meet Sammy immediately. Now, not in person, but either through audio tapes that Henry picks up in the game or the intercom system that is established in a later chapter of the game. I would have Sammy act all friendly and essentially trick Henry into turning on the machine in order to unleash the demon. And then after that, we could play out the same scene from the game where Sammy captures Henry and tries to sacrifice him. Henry being the one to turn on the ink machine always bothered me, and I feel like audiences will see that in the movie and immediately think Henry is an idiot, so that completely avoids that. And then it sets up the meeting between Henry and Sammy in a very cool way that doesn't feel random, and then you get the added shock that he's actually just insane. The next notable big event in the game is when Henry meets Boris, a former employee who turned into the wolf character from the cartoons. I believe he was either the first person turned into a cartoon character using the ink machine, or one of them, but don't quote me on that. That is also when we're introduced to Alice Angel, formerly a voice actor for the cartoon. During the process of Alice being transformed, something went wrong and she essentially came out deformed with half of her face melting. Before Henry had met her, she had been killing and experimenting on ink creatures in order to find a way to fix her face, specifically other wolf characters that look like Boris. The game makes it incredibly obvious where the story is going from there, because the next thing that happens is Alice takes Boris hostage, turns him into a monster, and forces you to fight him and kill him. Boris should be in the movie a bit longer rather than just the second act and then dies, because audiences won't have enough time to get attached to his character. That's kind of killing off characters in stories 101. You should introduce Boris a bit earlier so that he's the one who saves Henry from Sammy Lawrence, so that he's immediately established as friendly and as a secondary protagonist. And then rather than making Boris die in the fight, maybe Boris remembers who he's fighting, he manages to control himself and run away. And that's when we reach chapter 4 and 5 of the game, aka Act 3 of the movie. Alice is killed by a character who looks strikingly similar to her, named Allison Angel. Allison is another person who gained the appearance of the same cartoon character but came out normal. I'm not entirely sure how they explain her resisting the ink and not being crazy, but nonetheless she's an important character, along with her companion Tom, another variant of Boris. I haven't mentioned this, but throughout the game there's also other iconic enemies such as the Projectionist and the Butcher Gang, but to save time I'm going to be skipping over them as they're really not important to the overall story and lore anyways, even if they are pretty cool enemies. Final bit of the game is Henry tracking down the demon and following him into his lair to see that he has evolved and turned into a massive monster that runs extremely fast. This version of the demon reminds me of when Nemesis and Resident Evil 3 evolves into that dog-like version of himself. Henry manages to make the demon injure himself in this big open room and then takes the chance to run back to his lair where he places this film reel on a projector that defeats the demon. The reel is what's referred to as a reset mechanism for the ink machine and the demon. The ink machine and the demon are essentially in this infinite loop in the ink realm. First two chapters are the real studio, and then Henry discovers that the studio is just insanely massive and infinite in size and keeps growing. That is because of the ink machine trapping the studio in its own dimension/realm. Now here's the thing with that. Audiences are not going to understand that and are definitely going to think it's stupid. What's the fix for that? I don't know. That would require rewriting the actual lore of the games. Maybe you can keep it exactly as is, leave it up to interpretation, make it something like the ending of Donnie Darko. I just think audiences would react negatively if you spell everything out and give all the answers. The one thing about this finale that I would change is make it to where the monster version of Boris comes back and fights the demon, essentially giving Henry the open chance to place the reel and reset the demon. I do think that's when you should kill Boris rather than killing him off much earlier. It's more emotionally impactful and he goes at a hero that sacrificed himself for Henry. The current director attached to direct this movie is this guy who I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce his name, make myself look incredibly stupid. I've never seen any of his movies, so I have no idea if he has a distinct style or what his strengths and weaknesses are, but I'm sure he'll do a great job. Realistically, Sammy could be his original voice actor. You only see his face maybe once or twice, and you can't really make out what he looks like. The only reason for why I would see them replacing the voice actor for Sammy and Alice Angel is if they have an actual flashback to when all of them were normal employees in the studio back when it was up and running. Although Alice Angel might have more of a reason to change actors because you do very much see her face in the game. But then again, it could just be the voice actor from the game doing the mocap, and then now instead of just doing the voice, they are now physically playing the character. Boris doesn't even speak, so that could be anyone. But that's when you get to Henry, who should obviously be played by Ryan Gosling. I'm obviously joking, the role can go to anyone as long as they're a good actor. That's just who I would like to see. Let me know in the comments who you would fan cast as Henry. And with that being said, thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.
Yo, douchebag! Yeah, you! Do you want some spaghetti? Do you really want spaghetti? Then listen to this backstory. Blah, blah, blah. Fucking ink and shit. Blah, blah, blah. You got that? What? Oh yeah, put some shit on that pedestal, you jackass.
What the fuck is going on?